Hello. This year I have been undertaking my most ambitious hobby project ever to collect, build, paint and play with a Marienburg themed Empire army complete with background lore that is composed of miniatures from every era of Citadel and Games Workshop. As a collector, this is a dream project for me. I can go through the catalogues and my collection and rifle through all of these different hidden bits of parchment to try and find classic miniatures that I think add some character to my army. But as a painter, a terrible painter, this is the absolute opposite of whatever excitement and enthusiasm I feel for the collecting and the storytelling. This, from a painting perspective, is an absolute nightmare. Now, admittedly, it has been a minute or two since I last updated you on the project, so I thought it was high time that I got all of those miniatures out and talked you through where everything is. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today it's time for another entry in my Marienburg diary. If you've been following the channel for a while, then you're probably already familiar with my Marienburg army project, but if you're new to this, I just wanted to cover off some of the key reasons I thought it was worth me exploring this ambitious project. So, first of all, it's the collecting of an Empire army. Back in the day, I had more or less every different Warhammer Fantasy army at one point in one of the editions, but I never actually collected the Empire for no particular reason. So it felt like a good army to bring me back into Warhammer Fantasy and the old world and to create a fully realized army of my dreams. Another reason is that as I do this work now, I spend so much time looking at retro miniatures and going through old catalogues that I constantly find myself inspired by the designs and the feel and the stories of all of those classic Citadel miniatures. So I wanted to find a way to put as many of those together in one army as I could. But I also didn't want to ignore where some of the miniatures have gone over the years, some of the incredible stuff that came in later editions, and even in other game systems. When I look at Necromunda, or 40k, or even Age of Sigmar, I see incredible models that I think that could work really, really well alongside some of those classic Citadel miniatures. So that was a big part of the project for me as well, trying to grab different things, different miniatures, different stories from all of these different parts of Citadel and Games Workshop history and put them all together on the tabletop in one go. And then, of course, there is the idea that this project would gently encourage me to stop ignoring a part of the hobby that I've always struggled with. I've just never invested in learning how to paint and how to actually get miniatures painted and armies completed. It's never been the biggest part of the hobby for me. Collecting, telling stories, reading the books, and playing the games were always much, much bigger and funner parts of this gaming hobby. And painting was the chore that I just had to do as quickly as possible, just get it done so that I could get those miniatures on the table. I'm still suffering from a bit of that attitude. There's a sort of psychological block. It's still something that has to be done. But through this project, I've been trying to nudge myself into places where I can try new things and I can spend a bit more time on those aspects of just painting miniatures that I've ignored or neglected in the past. One of the really cool things for me about this project and sharing this project here on the channel has been that a number of friends and fans and companies have reached out and tried to help me in this endeavor. So there's a couple of things I'm going to talk about. Some very, very generous people have completed miniatures for me, painted them, and they look amazing and they add so much to the army project. And then also a couple of companies have sent me some cool stuff. This is not an advert. In no way was I sponsored by these companies and they're not paying me to talk about their products, but they have been a great help. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about a couple of things that were sent to me that have changed my engagement with painting and how I've approached some of this stuff. Frontier Wargaming sent me this hobby deck, which is designed to allow you to take your painting platform and do it anywhere. You can work outside, you can work on your couch, you can work at a desk if you want to. And there are loads of functional aspects to it. The water holder, the paintbrush holder, all of the paint pot holders, all of that stuff is modular and can be changed out and has lots of different functional options. I have really enjoyed using this, and not just because it has the amazing engraved Jordan Sorcery logo in the middle, but also because it is really comfortable to use, and it's actually allowed me to try painting in different environments. I've taken this outside, I've used this in the armchair whilst watching Star Trek Voyager, I've used it in lots of different places around the house, and it's been fun to test it out and to see what works for me. Now, if I'm being totally honest, I've actually found that the place I most enjoy using it is on this table right behind me. Because of the height of the hobby deck, it actually raises the sort of workstation that I'm working. The light on top is really powerful, it's really helpful, and then having all of the sort of organizational functionality has been really beneficial for me to get my paints and my paintbrushes out of the way. So I've really enjoyed having a sort of, not strict, but like a set, uniform kind of approach. Everything has a place, it's very comfortable, it's very ordered, and when I sit down to paint, it's been really nice to just know this is my little painting station where I can do my work. So that has been a great help, and I've really enjoyed using it. So I'm very, very pleased and very grateful to Frontier Wargaming for sending me one. And then the mighty Duncan Rhodes and his team at the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy sent me the first 2 waves, the complete sets of the 2 thin coats paints that they produce. And they are really great. I've really enjoyed using them. Again, they didn't ask for anything in return. I think they probably saw an earlier diary and took pity on me and the struggles that I was having. But they've basically allowed me to use loads of different options, and I've literally never had this many paints available to me, this many different colors that I could use, and essentially a color that can work for any situation. So that has been awesome. I've never used dropper bottles before, so that was really good. And here is a confession, and I feel like I'm always confessing things in these Marienburg diaries, but I haven't really used any non-Citadel color paints in pretty much my entire painting career. The odd one here and there, but really, I always used to go into the stores, go into games workshops, pick up the paints there. I didn't want to explore anything else. I didn't want to sort of burden myself with any knowledge of other paints, whether they were better value for money or more effective. I was just very almost institutionalized, for want of a better word, by the sort of games workshop aspect of it. Because I loved the miniatures, I loved the games, the paints were all cool and they worked for me, and I was not doing any sophisticated techniques and I was not spending a lot of time on my painting. So just picking them up in the store, that was convenient and all I needed. What I've actually been able to do through this, through getting the 2 thin coats paints from Duncan and the team, that has really opened my eyes to just what else is out there. That there are other paints that are just as good, that work in similar or better ways, that offer different options. And in many cases, I'm still going to be using Citadel color paints because I think many of them are great and they work exactly how I need them to work. But I'm also now sort of feeling like the scales have fallen from my eyes a little bit, and I can take a look at what else is out there and start using that other stuff as well. I mean, I don't want to oversell this as some sort of massive psychological breakthrough. We're just talking about paints and models at the, but it was still quite a sort of revelation for me to go, you know what? Actually, this is really cool and this works really well, and this other approach, this other option is just as good. So I'm very grateful for Duncan for sending through those paints and for giving me that opportunity to expand my mind a little bit. And yeah, I think it's been super beneficial, and they're definitely going to be part of my ongoing paint usage, I think. So yeah, a big win. Okay, but enough about gear and gifts for now. Let's talk about gargoyles. You may remember that one of the inciting incidents for the creation of this very army was when I learned more about the lore for the gargoyles of Barda, an early regiment of renown that was accidentally summoned by a naive wizard in the city of Marienburg. It has always been a cornerstone of my plan that these cantankerous lads would be a unit in my army, led by the great-great-grandson of that original wizard, and he's just as shady as that original guy ever was. I managed to source a number of the original Citadel sculpts for these gargoyles, though I've not yet been able to get hold of a musician. One of the models had a broken spear, so I replaced it with the brazier from a plastic bright wizard sprue, so that it stands out and can act as a standard bearer for the unit. I'm thinking I'll probably use Birdmen of Catraza rules for the unit in older fantasy battle games, though I'm not sure yet what rules will work for the old world. The champion in the unit is going to be Bertrand von Mickelstein, the wizard, so in a game he'll be using his spells to fly and fight alongside the gargoyles, rather than being a traditional spellcaster. I knew I wanted to use a good, villainous-looking wizard model for this guy, but I didn't want him to look outright monstrous. So I've been looking at Curse City and had been considering using the shady hero Octron Glimscry, but cool as that miniature was, it just didn't seem to quite work for me. So instead I've gone with the bad guy Torgilius, the Chamberlain. I've removed a couple of the superfluous bits, like a bat and a rat, briefly toyed with the idea of adding a Curse City gargoyle to his shoulder, but it just looked way too big and top-heavy. So instead I've gone with the simple, yet very untrustworthy looking wizard on his own. And then the paint scheme is even more simple as it gets, because I wanted an otherworldly kind of feel to these gargoyle chaps. I've just given them a red zenithal over a black prime. I actually originally tried using a dark purple spray that I had for the zenithal. I thought it might create a cool kind of weird look and tie it more to the deadly nightshade paint that I'm using for the other units in the army, but it just didn't look great. So I've used Mephiston red to try and get that brimstone and fire looking finish. I know these guys are just super simple, but with the bases done, I think they're going to be quite fun and have that magical spirit, so I think I'm going to be happy with them. You may remember that I mentioned I wanted to put together a unit of moss troopers, so mounted sort of reconnaissance troopers who would have gone out in front of L'Armée Trudot to scout out wherever they were. I just wanted to have that extra light cavalry option in my army list in case I needed it, even though I'm imagining there's going to be lots of fights in swamps and marshes, so they're probably not going to be the most appropriate choice. That meant that I wanted to get hold of some Imperial Pistoliers, and we know now they've become very difficult to get hold of. Fortunately, one of my Patreons, thank you so much, Zingbo, has been able to get me some of the old metal Pistoliers, and then I also got super lucky at the UK Games Expo Bring and Buy, where someone had a big box of like random high elves and dwarves and Empire Pistoliers on their sprue. And that was really cheap, really good value for money. So I've got that unit now, and I'm very excited to put them together. I just haven't assembled them yet. But I have to take a moment to talk about a very, very generous gift from a fan of the channel that is just awesome. The incredibly talented painter War Fanatic on Instagram very generously painted up this first Moss Trooper for me. A really lovely bit of work that I am so proud to have in the army. The Pistoliers will be headed up by the mounted Marienburger captain from Moor time, and I was also gifted a mounted Bright Wizard by Dan from the Hobby Hour podcast on the Miniature Realms channel, so I am tempted to include him in this unit somehow as well. Really looking forward to putting these guys together as just an extra choice for me in the army. So let's get into a unit that I did spend a bit more time painting. This was a tricky one for me. I'm overall pleased with the results for these little guys, but it was also a sort of learning experience, I would say. These are the Halfling Archers, led by the legendary raconteur, expert, bowman, and brunch master, Tamburlaine Tussock. These miniatures are the Colin Dixon unit for the Dogs of War, Lumping Croups Fighting Cocks, and all I've done is mount them on some textured bases. The Lumping Croup model has been rechristened as Tamburlaine Tussock, although I appear to have misplaced his shield, so I still need to find a replacement for that. I wanted to paint the halflings with a realistic colour scheme, by which I mean that I wanted the metal stuff to look like metal and the leather stuff to look like leather, skin tones different to clothing, and so on. For this unit, I actually decided that I was going to make full use of both the hobby deck and the Two Thin Coats paints. So I sort of committed to sitting down in my chair and using that deck, and painting the entire unit there just using Duncan's paints. It was a really interesting experience. There were times when I got quite frustrated with it because of my own choices. But in terms of the sort of functionality of the deck and the paints, they were really successful. But where that frustration came in was because I was trying to do this sort of, quote unquote, realistic paint scheme where things looked a bit more like they are supposed to. And I kind of got this, it was like the intersection of the limits of my skill, the limits of my technique and my understanding, the limits of my ability to keep a brush steady were meeting the expansiveness of my ambition and the sort of vision that I had in my head for what this unit was going to look like. And then I was going through the painting stages, constantly tripping myself up. I would do, say, the flesh and then get a bit of paint over the uniforms. Then I'd paint the uniforms and get a bit of paint over the flesh. So then I had to go back and paint the flesh again. And this was happening again and again and again because I just couldn't quite control how the paint was moving around and things like that. So it did become quite a sort of frustration by the end of it. I enjoyed the process overall, and I'm proud of these very simple little chaps. I know they're not winning any awards, but I'm proud that I have painted them and that I can consider them finished. So that is a good feeling. And that has buoyed me up and made me want to paint more stuff and carry on with the journey. But there was definitely these moments during the process where it really did feel like, you know what, I'm not sure I want to do any of this anymore because I'm just finding it too frustrating. It's causing me too much stress and annoyance because there are too many steps and there's too much skill required, even for something as simple as just a handful of colours. There's kind of this, I think with the gargoyles, because they are magical beings, just doing that sort of single colour scheme, very simple colour scheme kind of works, and I like that. It appeals to me. When we've got halflings and ogres and everything else, they need to feel a little bit more complex for me. When they're arranged on the board, I'm going to want them to look different, to look distinct to the kind of magical guys. And that's where the ambition comes from, I suppose. And that, I guess, is something I'm going to have to work towards and just accept that it's a longer, slower journey. And actually, one of the other units that I started, I got a bit stressed out with for similar reasons, and I kind of stopped, and I think I'm going to come back to them. But the whole point about taking it slow and doing it in stages and not stressing myself out has been a hard-won lesson, I think, but I feel like I'm learning it. So let's talk just briefly about those small unit of big guys, the Ogre mercenaries of the 5-sided coin. Like the halflings, I have taken my half-baked approach to these guys, going for a quote-unquote realistic colour scheme. I started doing some of the colour blocks, but then I found myself getting a bit worried about what colours to use for some of the larger areas, as I didn't want it all to look too one-note. And then that indecision kind of turned into me stalling, and I decided to do some of the other units that were simpler before coming back to these guys. I've also added one of the halfling archers to the lookout nest on the back of the cities of Sigmar Ogre, as this is going to be an invention that happens during the story of this army. And there's a specific scenario I'm writing where they end up on a waterlogged mission, and this allows them to keep an eye on what's coming up ahead of them. And then there's a couple of units that I've assembled but haven't painted, or in some cases have primed but done nothing else to them yet. So let's take a quick look at some of those. Forge World made some amazing Empire models under the Warhammer Forge brand, and the Nuln Ironsides are a great example of this. The detail on the bodies is amazing, and the command squad are simply gorgeous. I will admit to having a little bit of trouble getting comfortable looking weapon and arm placements with these though. For what seemed to be internal political reasons, Forge World were not allowed to release infantry units at the time, so instead they had to do upgrade kits, which is why the Ironsides don't have arms and you have to use the plastic handgunners kit. I don't know if I've used the plastics effectively, but I ended up having to sort of sloppily apply liquid green stuff to try and close a couple of the gaps around the shoulders and the arm joints. Fortunately, I think they look okay. This unit is captained by Nathaniel Harcourt, a blackguard and scoundrel who is nevertheless a terrific shot. In the story of L'Armée Trudot, after the dodgy wizard Bertrand von Mickelstein, Harcourt is probably the least trustworthy and likeable of the mercenaries that Ponsard has hired. But he's only there to do a job, so so it all works out in the end, I guess. On the other end of the likability spectrum, there are the Slayer Marines of the famous dwarf ironclad, the Seabeard, led into battle by the raucous, lovable Flint Barracrack. For Flint, I am using the White Dwarf subscriber model from 2012, and for his Slayer Marines, it's another Colin Dixon Dogs of War unit, the much-loved Pirate Slayers. Like the other units, I've mounted these jolly good fellows on textured resin bases to try and simulate the docks and wharfs of Marienburg, or perhaps the deck of some ship that has set sail from the port. There's also some unit fillers and bits of cargo and barrels and stuff like that I'm going to try and use to tie all of the units together. It won't make sense when they're on a traditional battlefield or even in the wastelands outside Marienburg, but I'm hoping that it will still tie the entire army together visually and look quite nice en masse. I have left the best until last. This is the Marienburg class Landship from Forge World. It's a notorious kit, absolutely beautiful, but the Forge World resin has warped and created all kinds of very unruly parts. It's just an absolute nightmare to put together. And thankfully, my good friend Stu, who's co-host of the GW Books Club on this channel, and also has the Miniature Realms painting channel, which is great, and you should all check out if you want some really good info on how to paint your miniatures. Stu volunteered to put together and paint the Marienburg class Landship for me, and he has done an absolutely wonderful job. There is a full video on Stu's channel that I will link below, all about the process and pain that went into completing this awesome piece. Not least because I asked him to use a pot of my favourite classic Citadel colour, Deadly Nightshade, somewhere on the model, and apparently it was quite a nightmare, but it looks so good, so I'm really grateful that he persevered. I've not yet written the full background for this impressive war machine in L'Armée Trudot, but I do know that it is called the Amphore, and that it was hired by Ponsard to aid in a mission deep into the marshlands in search of murderous one-eyed fairy folk, or something yet darker. I do intend to spend a little more time here on the channel at some point talking about this beautiful kit, the background it has in the Tamarkan book, and the rumours I've been able to uncover about the original plans for these mighty war machines. Sadly, they were for a Warhammer world that just never came to pass. For now, though, it's all I can do to stop staring at this beauty. A real hobby wish granted, and a huge thank you to Stu for doing such sterling work. I think I've talked a little bit about how important to me the story of this army is. That informs all of my unit choices and how I've put them together. The background to those units is going to be a really important part of just my enjoyment of playing games with them, I think. I've also written a set of fiction that goes alongside the army. It's not the actual story necessarily of the army itself. I kind of feel like those stories are going to emerge from the games I play. Who do they fight? Who do they defeat? Who are they defeated by? That's all going to inform sort of my ongoing narrative with Ponsard Trudot and his army. But then I've been working on something called The Widow Trudot, about his wife, that takes place following his big campaigns and kind of tells more of the story of where Ponsard Trudot came from and the Trudot family and their journey to trying to reclaim the glory of this former noble house in the Empire and Marienburg and near Bretonnia by trying to create one of the greatest wines in the history of the old world. That story is something I'm releasing on my website, jordansorcery.com. You can already read the first 2 parts of that story, and the 3rd part is coming soon. I've also done a reading out loud here on the channel. So if you'd rather listen to me tell the story, then you can hear the first part now, and I'm going to be releasing a reading of the second part soon as well. And that story will hopefully continue, and we'll find out what happens to the Trudot family and the Trudot name over time. So very excited to do more with that. There is also some stuff that I'm working on for my army list for L'Armée Trudot, and a sort of War Scroll style unit reference cards that I'm putting together, a little bit of backstory, all of the actual information about the unit, the names and the composition, So I've got them as references when I go to play games. I'm probably going to try and find a way to sort of create nice looking things in Photoshop. If and when I get those finished, I will share them so people can take a look. I'm really enjoying that aspect of this project as well. That sort of it's creative in a different way. It's something I feel a bit more confident with as opposed to painting, but it still allows a sort of level of, I don't want to oversell it, but like artistry. So that's quite nice. And there is also now an official date for the first outing for L'Armée Trudot. So I'm going to be going to CrackCon in Derby in October, and that is going to be the first time, I think, that the full army, or a sort of large portion of the army, takes to the field. Hello, Martha. Takes to the field in a full game of the old world. So I'm very much looking forward to that. That kind of gives me a deadline to get some of these units finished as well. So I'm going to have to make sure that I really keep on with the momentum and keep getting stuff finished. I'll also tease that I am currently working on a scenario that pits L'Armée Trudot, or whichever army of order that you fancy using, against some fiendish swamp-dwelling, marsh-dwelling, fog-dwelling creatures. I think it's going to be really good fun, and I've got some really fun stuff included in that, and hopefully that will be out by the end of the year. There's still a good amount of time to continue working on it, but I'll share more info about that soon as well. The other thing that's exciting with this is that some other friends have stepped forward or volunteered or let me sort of convince them to help me out, and they're going to be working on some specific units, some specific models to help me make sure that I hit that date. So they're going to be painting those, and there are some really fun, awesome people involved in that. So I will talk more about those in a future update. I think the next update is probably going to be more specifically about the actual army list and the composition and what I'm trying to work towards, because that will also allow me to put some stuff to the back of the priorities list for painting, because I'm not going to need it in October. So that is my plan. The next update, we'll talk about the actual army lists, and I'll share some of those visuals, and we'll also talk about whatever progress, hopefully progress, I've made in painting. But until then, I really hope that you've enjoyed this sort of insight into my, hopefully not too torturous to listen to, process of putting together this army. I'm still having a great deal of fun with it. It is making progress. It's a little bit slower than I might have liked, but with that end date in sight, or at least major milestone date, I know that I need to make sure I get some stuff done. So keep watching for new updates, hopefully very soon, as long as I'm not too distracted by Martha. In any case, thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. If you've ever wondered why in some videos I look like I'm just covered in fur, it's because I am, because of this. This is what happens, and I get covered in fur instantly. But I can't stay mad about it.